Well, it's really good to have you back with our weekly Zoom interview for church planting here at the North New South Wales Conference. And today we have a really great guest, a person you probably know very well, and that is Pastor Daniel Christie. Pastor Daniel Christie. Daniel's leading the blind church up in Tweed Heads, which is an amazing opportunity. And they have a great vision, immense mission field as well. And yeah, we just want to dive into a real area of ministry that Daniel has been very, very successful with. It's a real passion of his, and he's actually been very successful as well. But before we do, Daniel, I just wanted to just start off, the story of church planting is something which is really gripping. And so I'd like to ask you, how did you get into church planting? Where did you begin the journey with this whole concept of church planting?
Yeah, for me it was, I worked as a Bible worker for quite a few years before I even got into ministry or pastoral ministry. And so there was a transition for me from evangelism, and then that sort of morphed into church planting when I was working in Sydney. And I was working down there with Gary Kent's church in Sydney. And there was a bit of a team there, and I was lucky enough to be part of a team that were trying to do some church planting in Maroubra and different parts of the city. And that was my first exposure to it. And I guess for me, doing evangelism, it was very much the easy next step because, you do ministry and you form a group in a certain area. And so it sort of morphed into that. I had no training. It was just something I observed. But I think from then I started to sort of pick up on a real interest for it. And back then, not a lot of people spoke about it, but it was beginning to become a bit of a buzzword. And for me, I just happened to get exposed to it more and more. And then when I finally went to Avondale to do my training, there were some church planting opportunities in Newcastle. So I was involved with a couple of things there. I eventually worked with some already established church plants, but they were still quite new. And that was a great exposure to me. And I think that's where my passion really picked up about seeing that when you plant a church, there's a malleability there. There's a real opportunity to really make a church into sort of how you would want it to be versus working in an established church. Trying to change culture was quite challenging. And there's pros and cons to both, of course, but that got me very excited about with some things that I was interested in. And so from there, when I graduated, they offered me a church plant up where I am now. And so I was excited to take that opportunity. So yeah, I had around 5 or 6, maybe more church plants that I was exposed to in different aspects before I got up here. And that was just a really great learning opportunity for me to see all the ways and different ways that people do church planting. And you take bits and pieces, and then when you go plant your own church, you realize that half of what you thought would work doesn't work. And it's just, a constant evolving thing. So it's very exciting, the different dynamics behind it.
Well, so you were involved in the Fountain in the City church plant in Sydney, was that correct?
Yeah, well, not the actual Fountain in the City, but they wanted to plant in Maroubra. And they asked me to sort of lead the team there. And I had never done church planting at all. I just was a Bible worker, I'd done evangelism. And so there was a team of us. And so we just basically, like all church planting, you just do evangelism, So we did evangelism. We hired halls out, and we established a group in a library and things like that. So yeah, that was good to be in part of that team there that came out of the Fountain in the City. Yeah.
That's amazing, because I've actually been to Fountain in Maroubra and preached there, and it's a great group. So good to hear the person who kind of laid the foundation for that church plant. So then you went to my house in Newcastle, and what were some of the other church plants that you've been involved with?
There was another one in when we were at uni. There was one in Corumba. That was there. It was a sort of about 20 people. It was a Polynesian church plant, and Rome Ulia and myself were helping out there as students. And so they were sort of a little further on. They weren't essentially a cell church, but we were still very much in their early phases. and we were involved in working there. And so as we were sort of helping out there, we eventually, I then went over to My House Church from there. I was offered to go help out. Now with My House Church, there was, with My House Church, they wanted to plant a church in Newcastle at the time. And so they wanted to plant the church there, but we really felt it just wasn't ready, because My House was still very much church plant that was not quite in its solid phase yet. And so we were beginning to do that. We were starting to do some evangelistic work in Newcastle, but it was just quite premature to kick it off. So we decided as a team to draw back into My House Church, help My House develop a little further. So yeah, and there was another one, I can't remember where it was. There was another one. There was one in Tasmania I was involved in a little bit. Yeah, I can't remember. There's a few, but those are sort of the main ones that I was very much there for a period of time. But yeah.
So you've got some amazing experience in church planting. Another thing, Daniel, which is really significant as well, is just as we heard on the Zoom interview there, is you're doing this as a family. So you with your wife, Alicia, and two kids. So tell me a little bit more about being a church planter with a young family. How does that work? What's some of the things which work really well from that perspective?
What works well is, I think, you connect with a different group. You know, now families have become very much an evangelistic focus. You know, so I mean, before we had kids, we were very much connecting with young adults. You know, even though we weren't really young adults. But yeah, the moment you have kids, immediately you're connecting with people on that level. And I think we certainly saw at our church a lot more families come in, because there was a family vibe and a family focus that, and you know, naturally occurs when you have a family. So yeah, that's a really good thing. And my wife is so great at connecting with other mothers. So that was something naturally that occurred, you know, networking with mothers. And so we saw more contacts come in, and even some other Adventists too, where young families started to be drawn to what we were doing around that as well. Whereas I think when you, when you don't have kids, it's not really on your radar. You know, you're not thinking kids programs and stuff like that. That's usually other people are involved in that. But yeah, we certainly saw a shift for ourselves when that happened in our own lives. But it comes with its challenges, of course, but you know, a lot of blessings. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So just tell us a little bit more about the Vine. Just paint a picture for us. What does the Vine Church look like?
Yeah, well, we're a church plant that really began with a vision for not just being another building with that is open a few hours a week on a Saturday. For us, from the beginning, we had a vision that we wanted to be a center of influence. I think, you know, it's really a term that's used now, which is that when we saw the ministry of Christ, we see that the gospel, its effects are holistic, mentally, physically, spiritually. And so, you know, based on the Adventist message, we see that as a church, we have an opportunity here to build a culture that ministers to the whole person in Christ's name. And so for us, the culture of the Vine is moving in a direction of becoming a center of influence. Is one day when we get the building, we minister 7 days a week to the whole person, mentally, physically, spiritually. So that's sort of very basic way of putting it. But the Vine is started with about 4 people. We came out of Kingscliff Church. And when I started, it was myself, my wife, 2 Bible workers, and we had about 4 people that I'd just baptized, you know, 4 to 6 people. So that was essentially the beginning of the Vine. And we went to 12, and then we had about 30 baptisms, 15 baptisms the first year, another 10, 15 the next year. So we grew quite rapidly with baptisms, which was our goal. And we're sitting around 50, 60 people now come on a Sabbath, and it fluctuates a lot. I mean, and where we are, a lot of people come and go and stuff like that. So we've had this sort of growth that's happened, and very strong on community, very strong on connecting building a real family atmosphere, a very receptive atmosphere for seekers to come to. The term is seeker sensitive. So yeah, there's certain cultural things that are really important to us that I feel we're doing well amidst all the challenges of church planting. But yeah, the Vine is a church that is very focused on community outreach. We've always been very strong on constantly running things and doing things for the community. The right arm of the gospel is medical missionary, which we see as mental, physical, all these things. So that's, for a small church, the church has done very well to do so much with such a small group over the years. So yeah, that's sort of what the Vine is at this point.
No, that's fantastic. And I just want to dive into something which I have come to understand that you, in your ministry, Daniel, you're really effective at, and that is mentoring leaders. So just to give you a bit of background, so I have come to understand that out of the Vine have come a number of leaders, church planting leaders, who've gone to other places in the conference and potentially around Australia, wherever God has called them. So, for example, there's Robbie Morgan down at Coast Life church plant. You've got Steve, who's gone over to an established church nearby. And look, there's more. And the comment has been made that this small church, from an established church, perspective, the Vine has sent out more leaders than so many other churches. It's a really distinctive kind of feature, and I just want to dive into that. Why do you see mentoring leaders as such a core aspect to your ministry and church planting vision?
I think it's how you define your role as a leader. For me, being a pastor is to kick the ball to others so they can score. That's how I see myself. So from the very smallest thing right through to the guys who want to become ministers, it's the same principle. Not everyone's going to be a minister, and I think a lot of us pastors would share the same vision, and it's an ongoing thing of learning how to do this. But I see my job as someone who must elevate my members. I must decrease, they must increase, and I think it's really just perceptional, if I'm the star, if I'm the one up the front and it's all about me, I think I failed in my job. I see my goal as when others are preaching better than me, taking lessons better than me, ministering better than me, I've won. That's so I guess that's a principle that I live by, and I think I've always had that. But secondarily, it's also because I think if you've ever had someone invest in you, you learn the value of that, and you just want to pass that on. And so I think there has to be that DNA just first before you get into methodology or anything. There has to be that heartbeat that you have, which is, I want others to experience what others have done for me, which is I want to elevate people. I want to invest in them. I want them to believe that God can do great things through them. So, as a bit of an ethos, a bit of a principle, that's what drives me. That makes me very passionate. Is I don't want to be the superstar. I don't want to be the guy up the front, which any minister is a very capable person, and you can do that. But I think even if you're a father, it's the same principle. I exist to create an environment for my wife and children to be the best they can be. A pastor is no different. So yeah, I think that's what drives me. I really enjoy doing that. I enjoy seeing people go from where they are to where I believe that they can be. And so that's essentially what drives me, having that done to me in the past, but also sharing that with others. I certainly am no expert in it. I feel like a student constantly on how to do this to people. But yeah, I think that it's about approaching your ministry with a perception that you are there to elevate others, and really, really take an interest in how to do that is important.
So it's really that concept of empowering others, being a hero maker. That's very, very inspiring. It's not all about you or me, shall I say, but it's about who we can empower to reach their full potential, their growth in Jesus Christ. So just wanted to just to kind of paint that picture, uh, who are some of the leaders that you have mentored over the years that kind of really, yeah, you've been able to help achieve their leadership kind of roles?
Yeah, and when I say these names, it's hard for me to take credit. I mean, I think they're all great guys who were, self-empowered anyway. I mean, if I had anything to do, it's a privilege and I feel humbled. But yeah, we've got guys who I think so we've got, you mentioned Robbie, Steve Teal, he's now doing theology. He's pastoring a church up here. There's Toby and Toby's down in Melbourne. He's a pastor now. No, did I say Melbourne? Wodonga. I forgot the name. Is that the right church? Yeah. Sorry, Toby.
I think so.
Toby there. And then we had Josh Newbegin. He was pastoring at Byron Bay.
Yes.
So yeah, he worked with us for a number of years, and so it was good to see him go into that position. He's now down helping in Melbourne with the church plant down there while he's doing counselling on the side. So he finished his theology, and we talked about it, and he really felt he wanted to do counselling. I think he saw how much it's used. So he's actually doing that now to go then back into church planting. There's
Ballarat.
What's that? Sorry?
Is he down near Ballarat or Geelong?
Yeah, I think so. He's helping with Amy Laposa's church plant down there. Yeah, I have to check. I don't know the geographics too well. We just chat here and there about it. But yeah, he was pastoring in Byron Bay in our conference for a while. But he's gone down to just do some extra accreditation there. There's Akil. Many of people might know Akil. Akil's now working with Justin Lawman down in Adelaide. And so he's doing his theology by distance while he works down there as well. So those are the guys who in the last year, the years that I've worked with them, have gone on to do ministry and are all employed or doing church planting now. Yeah, and I think where we are too, we've got a lot of Arise students in and around us, so that gives me a lot of opportunity to really speak into and coach and mentor guys who are already wanting to, head in a direction of ministry. And Arise has really produced a lot of guys to go to Avondale, which is really great. And we've all encouraged them, hey, if you take this seriously, you've done a couple of years of Bible work, go to Avondale, go take the next step, and this is something we encourage these guys to do. So yeah, so that's sort of the main ones I can think of. There's other guys around, but they're not doing ministry, they're involved in different ways, or they're, whatever it is, they're preaching now, whereas they were too shy before or whatever. But so all those guys are involved with, I think most of them, a few of them, they've got church plants, which is good. That excites me, that they've got a passion for church planting as well. Really happy to see what God's doing through Robbie. Although Robbie, again, I don't really take credit for Robbie. He's just an awesome guy, and God's going to use him in mighty ways. So it was a privilege to work with these guys and to see them grow and to go where they are. So
I just wanted to dive in with you, Daniel, and just into the way you approach it. So you arrive at church one week, and there's a new guy, there's a new girl, there's a new young woman there at church. So what would be going through your mind? What would be part of your kind of strategy, methodology, as you said, to help that person, mentor that person to become a leader who could then go out to become a church planter, a church pastor, continue on as a Bible worker? What's your methodology?
Yeah, so what I really look for is, if we're talking, say, a member or a seeker coming, the first thing, of course, is establishing them in the Word and establishing them in community support, so they have a base. I have to see that, even if they're a long-standing Adventist, doesn't mean that they're socially connected, doesn't mean that they have a solid base. So they need to be involved, supported, and have that around them. I would then want to really establish, do they want to be invested in? This is something that took me a while to realize. Not everybody actually wants to be invested in, which is crazy to me, because that's a really thing I value. But some people don't. They just want to go to church and that's it. And as much as you can try and empower them, they don't want to. So I think that's why we see with Jesus, he selected who he invested in, because not everyone was but wanted to commit to what's required. So yeah, you look for the interest, but even so, I think it's about looking at what their potential is. And I think the more you work with people, you can pick up, looking at people, watching the way they operate, where their strengths and weaknesses lie, even from a superficial level. You know, are they extrovert? Are they introvert? Are they good with people? Are they whatever it is, you know? So you can analyze people, watch them conduct themselves. Are they more analytical? Do they have potential to be a great teacher? How do they go in a study? And so I'm always sort of analyzing that with people, and I look for potential there. And then what I would do is I'd really then operate on my 3 pillars of what I consider to be empowering or discipleship, or whatever you want to call it, which is belief. Belief is the first thing. And of course, everything I shared today comes from what Christ did to the 12 disciples. Jesus saw in them what they didn't see in themselves. He spoke into their lives, not what they were, but what they could be. This is stuff we know. And I think that we don't realize that as ministers, the power that our words have for people. When we walk up and say, hey, you know, I really think you would be great at this. You know, it's a simple thing, yet it leaves a profound impact on people. And it's not a natural thing. I'm certainly not someone who likes affirmation, and it's hard for me to give it because I don't really need it. I'm pretty self-driven, but you need to do it. You know, you need to, not all the time, but just occasionally walk up and say, the way you did that was incredible. I think you have real potential, and just speak belief into the person. And so that belief is really what I look at, because if they don't believe that they can be something in God, you're really going to struggle going forward. They have to receive that word that you're giving them. They have to believe, hey, maybe God can do something through me. And if they believe that, well, then yeah, you can go forward and do the rest that you need to do. But that belief is important, and people have to really establish a healthy understanding there. And I would just step aside here to say something really important, especially with the guys who've gone on to do ministry. This is something I've really emphasized, that if you don't have a healthy self-worth and identity in Jesus Christ, you'll never be a good leader. Because if you have a damaged self-worth, if you're insecure and you have the power of leadership, it's a bad combination, because you'll try and be what you're not. You'll always try and be what you think people want you to be, and you'll always struggle. That's unhealthy leadership. Healthy leadership to me is someone who goes, I'm a child of God. I'm not perfect, but the grace of Jesus Christ has saved me, and he's going to use me like he would anybody else. And anything good I do because of the grace of Jesus Christ, et cetera, you know. And as simple as that sounds, a lot of people struggle with that. And it's about really taking the time. I mean, I've literally sat with the whiteboard out for hours with some of these guys and helped them work through their insecurities in their ministries, because it all boils down to this. Now, and they would beat themselves up, or they would criticize themselves. These are real things that people deal with. And you have to be able to really go back and put your finger on the pulse with them, because they boil down to these core things. That, do you believe, you know, where is your self-worth coming from? Is it your performance? Is it coming from, you know, now that I'm a minister, I now have self-worth? No, that shouldn't give you that. Rather,
that's a very fickle thing to hang your self-worth on, because you
yes.
know, if you walk out to lunch and everybody's congratulating you because you've preached a great sermon, you know, your self-worth goes, you know, through the roof. But if you walk out there and everybody's eating their haystacks and chatting away, and they don't say boo to you, then suddenly your self-worth just plummets. It's kind of like the stock market. It goes up and down like a yo-yo.
Yeah. And so, you know, and as ministers, you know, Satan's always going to be trying to push us in that direction. You know, all of us are vulnerable to it. And look, all of us are insecure in some capacity. We all struggle with it. But I think it's such, and that's why I sidestep here to say this, because it's the number one thing that jumps out at me with anybody. And it's the Christian challenge, you know. Does 1 John 3 mean anything to you? We behold, we are the child of God, you know. It's like, do you believe that? You know? So I think that if you can lay that foundation, then you're able to do how I would define leadership, which is you're not worried about being number one. In fact, you don't want to be number one. You want others to be number one. And I think you can only do that if you're secure in Jesus. And whereas if you're not, if you need that self-worth from others, you will always want to be the number one. You will want to be in the shining light, and you will therefore fail as a leader, as far as I'm concerned. So I sidestep there because I think that when we talk about belief, not only is it you believing in people, but be careful, because some guys really feed off that, and you go, I'm not going to give you affirmation if it's going to feed a bad thing. You know, there are some guys I'm way more affirmative with than others, because they've got to earn it to some extent. So you've got to be careful with it. Like, some young guys really struggle with self-worth and identity, and they haven't laid that foundation. And until they get that, then they're not trying to feed for my affirmation. You know, they shouldn't be doing that. If I give them affirmation, I give them affirmation. But if they're needing that for their own self-worth, there's a problem. And you've got to really deal with that in the Christian sense. So yeah, so that's a really important thing I've had to really help guys realize, is that they're there to serve, they're there to elevate others, et cetera, et cetera. So with belief, yeah, I think belief is a big thing. And you can communicate belief into people's lives in many different ways, not always verbally. You know, if I walked up and I said, here, I've paid for you to go to Arise, or I'm going to pay for your first year's tuition at Avondale College. I mean, you are communicating belief to somebody. You're saying, I believe that much in you, right? So belief can come in many different ways. And I think that, you know, I remember when I first did my Bible worker training, I couldn't afford it. A random person paid for my course. Someone believed in me, you know, and when I wanted to give up, I remembered, no, how can I? Someone believes in me. So we all know the power of what it feels like when someone who we care thinks what they think says, I really believe you have potential, you know, because there is a war between what the devil says and what God is saying. So yeah, belief is huge. And, you know, belief is one thing. And even if they go, wow, you know, thank you, I did something, or they see something in me, that's just the beginning. You're going to have to drum. You're going to have to beat that drum on a regular basis, because the devil is going to constantly criticize them. So that's something you want to do. The second thing I always do is then, of course, equip them. You know, so belief, equip is, of course, investing in people, training them. And the way I see Jesus train people is both theory and practical. He would sit there and communicate theory to them. How do we pray? And he'd tell them, or how do we cast out demons? And he would tell them. But most of what he did was showing. You know, he would be practically in the field with them. Here's how I do it. Watch me do it. And then he would send them out by twos. Now you do it. You know, and so when we come to equipping, it's this age-old principle of mentorship, where I do two, you do two, and then I release you, you know, something like that. And it varies on each individual. But let's say I saw someone had the potential to be a good little evangelist. Now, part of this as well is, you know, how do you know? If you really want to take the next level, you can do things like spiritual gifts survey. They're not perfect. I find if I do a spiritual gift survey with somebody, and then I do an interview, what the results are. I interview them. I look for emotional flares with people. The moment a certain topic comes up, do I see a passion or an interest there? Usually their passions will align with their spiritual gifts. So there's certain things that I will do to try and draw out what I think their talents and gifts and abilities are. And sometimes just you've got to put them in the field, and then it will reveal itself as well. So that's sort of how you draw that out. But then when I move to equipping, equipping is theory, so you can do some training. So if I have a bunch of guys learning to do Sabbath school, we'll pull them all together. We'll look through the theory of how to do a great Sabbath school lesson, or a small group. But then they've got to go do it. And so usually I will do it. They'll watch me run one or two. We'll then communicate after that lesson. What did you think? I'll get them to critique me, you know, the things that they thought were good and bad. We'll talk about how that theory applied. And then they'll do a couple with me sitting there, you know, and you got to keep encouraging them. And then what we do is we always reassess, and a lot of positivities. I always emphasize the positives. You know, if there's a criticism, always give two positives. I learned that actually working with an Australian level swim coach. He used to coach the Australian swim team. And he said to me, I used to do swim coaching with kids, and he said, I pull all the kids up all the time on their faults and their swimming. And he'd say, Dan, everything you're saying is right. He says, but these poor kids are going to cry themselves to sleep. with all your criticisms. He said, if you're going to give a criticism, give two affirmations. Say, oh, look, you need to work on your hands here, but man, the way you're kicking is excellent. And man, you're doing so well with your breathing. He says, always do that. So I always remembered that it's easy to point the criticisms out, but always give them a lot of affirmation. So that's something I like to do. So with the theory, you get them to apply it, you talk through it, and you go from there. Now, the challenges, of course, that you'll face here is people's time. They're very time poor, the inconsistencies of people's life. Life happens, things come up where they're out of it, for a month because of a family issue or something. So these are all the variables that come into what should be a beautifully smooth transition is just not a smooth transition. So it takes time. It can take a couple of years to go over this process. And the third pillar I have is opportunity, which is simple, which is you got to give them opportunity to do it. A lot of ministers are afraid to hand their pulpit over to people or to the Sabbath school lesson or whatever it may be. You're going to have to, obviously train them first. Give them a good basis, but they have to step up and they've got to be allowed to make mistakes. That's what I call the opportunity. You're allowed to make mistakes. But as we call it, there's no mistakes. There's just learning opportunities. And I say to people, the only mistake you'll make is if you don't learn from it, So that's sort of the three things, which is believe in people, show you believe in them, equip them through theory and practicality, and opportunity, release them to do it. This is the three things that I think helps people to go from where they are to the next thing. And you've got to do it in stages. Let's say you see potential of them as a great preacher. Well, maybe you just get them to take the prayer, and then maybe you get them to just do an announcement. You got to do it in stages. A lot of the guys, when they do their first sermons at church, I get them to do their testimonies because that's easy. They're not sitting there doing a topical study or an exegetical study or something. A lot of guys, a lot of these guys, they're tradies. To them, their brain explodes, as they tell me when I'm trying to explain stuff. So I've learned not to overcomplicate things. This is something that is a challenge, and realizing that you've got different personalities and you've got to work with them on their personality and on their strengths and weaknesses. So, I'm a big fan of understanding basic psychology. I'm naturally an analytical person, so this stuff I approach it this way clearly. So I spent a lot of time studying behavioral psychology, understanding the various personality types, things like that. So I bring all that in, and you don't have to be that technical with it, but that's just how my brain seems to work. I enjoy really understanding how everybody ticks, and then going, this is how they'll work, and they'll work, and they'll work. So yeah.
Daniel, that sounds very empowering and very, very exciting as well. I just wanted to get your thoughts. Say somebody listening to our interview today might be thinking, that sounds so amazing, but maybe why would I start, or how could I start? So what would you say to somebody who really wants to get into the process of mentoring, equipping, empowering leaders? What would you say to them?
Yeah, look, I would say that just on the same principle, learn some theory first, read some great books, and also analyze, have you ever been mentored? There's a good chance if you're a minister that someone's invested in you along the way, even in a small way. Really sort of jot down the things that you valued, that you felt were really good. Everyone should have a mentor now. If you're a minister, you should have at least, I remember Tom Evans saying, I really agree with this, you should have at least 3 mentors at any given time in your life. If you're a conference president, we should have 3 people that you talk to who are previous conference presidents. So, everybody should have a mentor. So if you don't get one, or find someone that you really value who you think does well in this area, and really talk to them. So, get your training. Don't just rush into it, because you can do the wrong thing. But I think as well that when you can begin with one person. Start simple. Look for someone who's interested. Someone's got a passion. God's working on their heart. And it may be they're going from simply attending church to now they have one role in the church. That's a win. In fact, most of your congregation, that's what you're going to be doing. So that's discipleship, and so really the goal you should have, just to sidestep here, but it's important, is the goal you should have in discipleship is ultimately for the seed to bear seeds, the fruit to bear seeds itself. So it's one thing to take someone through to become a preacher, but it's another thing for that preacher to then train other preachers. That's when you're really winning. That's what we're working on a lot. I've got a girl that I trained through to become, she was sort of here and there. She got baptized. I invested in her over the years. Spending time with people is everything. So I spent time with her. I trained her. I taught everything I could about evangelism. She came, saw me do it. She's now the evangelism leader of our church, and I get her to do our evangelism training. So that's now where I see success. Isn't that sort of thing. She's taking people on Bible studies. She's teaching people how to do things. That's how you win. So so to answer the question, I would say that start simple and start with little steps with people, and just constantly analyze, assess how it's going, what's working, and realize this, that be selective in who you choose. I've learned the hard way. I've invested a lot of time and a lot of energy in people who had no interest in sticking with it. And they just failed the first challenge they had. And literally 6 months of my time's gone, so you've got to be quite selective there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Really appreciate your being willing to share. And just as we finish together, I was wondering if you'd be willing to pray for all of those listening, that they may become empowering leaders, hero makers, people that equip others, so that we can really grow the movement that Jesus started, and ultimately see Jesus coming back. We can follow in his footsteps. Would you be able to do that for us?
Sure, happy to. Father in heaven, we think of the Great Commission to go out and make disciples. This is the call of the church, and it is especially the call of the leaders in the church. Father, when we look at ourselves, we see so much work still to do. How can we possibly invest in others? Well, it's not about us, Lord. There's always work to do. We're always broken. We're always learning. But Father, use us to even give a little back to draw people to Christ. And I pray especially for those who are listening, for the leaders in our church, that they will incorporate into their ministry the idea that Jesus had when he looked at those 12 men and saw the potential. And Father, we know that Jesus laid the model for us. I pray that we're able to fulfill that model, to really replicate it in our churches, so that we can sit back and see that our members are rising up, training others, leading others, because that's when we'll truly become a movement. And I pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Daniel. That's amazing. And may you raise up many, many more leaders throughout the amazing ministry that God has given to you.
Praise God.